Well, hey, Mountainside, it's Tuesday again, obviously, or I wouldn't be speaking to you, but I pray you've had a blessed start to your week. It's been good around here. Things are hopping. We have our normal activities, of course, but we also have the installation of the new flooring in the gymnasium. And those two guys, they are working their tails off. They've been here since early yesterday morning, and I'm just amazed at the progress. You're going to be very impressed. But those of you that are here and participate on Wednesday nights, pay attention to, we're probably going to have to put some signs on the doors, and I won't know until, tomorrow sometime exactly what we can and can't do on that floor. We may have to stay off of it completely, but just be mindful of all of the doors going into the gym and pay attention to any signage that might be put up. So now this evening, I just want to continue with our study of Nehemiah and just share some insight that I've gained through personal study and through our cafe class this past Sunday. I call it the cafe class because it was in the gym. We were actually in the auditorium this past week. But it is pretty amazing at this point in time. We're in chapter 6, and there's not a lot of detail on time, but at the end of the chapter, all of a sudden the wall is completed, and it's phenomenal. But what's even more so, in the way of just almost miraculous, is all of this work has been done in just 52 days. And this is what can be accomplished when we have common goals, when we work together, when we have good godly leadership, and when that godly leadership is trusting the Almighty God and looking to Him for guidance, for sometimes for Him to intercede in circumstances. And I think we can learn so much from Nehemiah and the way that he handled this circumstance. Now, this project for God's chosen people, it has certainly been met by Satan using humanity in just about every discouraging method that one could think of. And this chapter 6, it's no exception. And this chapter reveals the art, I'm just going to call it the art of intimidation. And this intimidation is brought right to Nehemiah personally. And the powers to be surrounding Jerusalem, they use every avenue they can to intimidate, frighten Nehemiah into giving up on this task of rebuilding Jerusalem. And sadly, when you get to the end of the chapter, you realize they have some of God's own chosen people in on some of the schemes. This is what can happen when we take our eyes off the Father, when things of the world become more important than things of kingdom value. But it's under the gifted leadership of Nehemiah and the power of God, obviously, that the people are able to complete the rebuilding of the wall around the city. And at the beginning of the chapter, we realize that all that is left is setting the gates. I'm sure they're new gates at this time. And then maybe even more important than anything is the continued strengthening of the people inside the city itself. And you know what? Too many people do not realize the tremendous pressures and the testings that people experience day after day when they're in that position of leadership. Leaders are often blamed for things they didn't do. They're criticized for things that they tried to do. They can be abused in countless ways, especially verbal misconduct, if you will. And many times they're never given the opportunity to set the record straight. I found a quote from a president that was prior to my life, okay? Harry Truman, he wrote in the book, it's called Mr. Citizen. He wrote about the pressures of leadership, and he said this one thing. He said, if you can't stand the heat, you can finish the rest. Get out of the kitchen. And if you want to be a leader someday, you do have to understand that one. Now, in this chapter, the main adversaries, as I said earlier, they go after Nehemiah himself, and they're going to work overtime in trying to get him to compromise. Let's read just a few verses at the beginning of the chapter, verses 1 through 4. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message: Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me, so I sent messengers to them with this reply: I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. There's an old saying that I think applies here, and what they're attempting to do, is if you can't beat them, join them. And so they invite Nehemiah to this meeting, which was compromise in and of itself, as Nehemiah quickly points out in his response to them. But the surrounding opposing leaders, they've tried everything, at their disposal to disrupt and stop this work of rebuilding Jerusalem. But up to this point, they've also failed on every front. And God's people, as we read, they have not been perfect, but they've stuck together for the most part. They've looked to God. They've been in prayer. They've dealt with all of the problems as they arose. And one might say here that, the enemy's going to take a different approach. It's like, hey, guys, we're willing to meet you halfway. But, we learned something here. We learned that Satan, he is the master deceiver, and he'll use anyone and everyone that's ready and willing to join hands with him to stop anything of kingdom value. You see, loving compromise and cooperation, they can be a good and useful thing if there's no moral or spiritual issues involved. In fact, happy compromise can invigorate a marriage, and it can strengthen a ministry. But this is compromise among people who love each other and have common goals and purposes in mind. But if Satan is allowed, if he's allowed at all to just get just a tiny bit of his foot in the door, you better know. You better expect that all of a sudden the rules and the goals, they're not going to be the same anymore. In fact, they'll certainly not be for the good of the whole. And the ones trusting God will have the kind of discernment. They'll continually be working to defeat these kinds of adversaries, and with the sole goal in mind that all glory goes to the Father. What a blessing that always turns out to be. And I hope you can see how these things and just really everything that we've looked at in this book of Nehemiah, how it can be so helpful in our spiritual lives, helpful within our churches. But you know what? You can take these principles, you can take them to work. You can take them anywhere and everywhere you go and apply these things to your life. And maybe along the way, show the world Jesus Christ. I think this is why we're here, isn't it? We know that it is. Well, hey, thank you for tuning in this evening, and have a blessed rest of the week. Good night.